Welcome to This Is the Day with Mike Rogers.
This is the day that the Lord hath made, that the Lord hath...
The prophet Isaiah tells us that the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. And in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, who shall stand as a banner for the people, for the Gentiles shall seek him. And friends, I'm here to tell you, this is the day.
This is the day, this is the day that the Lord hath made.
Let's pick back up in Matthew 24. Jesus has already given what he calls the beginning of birth pains, the preliminary signs: wars, rumors of wars, persecution, gospel expansion. These were the early contractions. Now he moves closer to the event itself. He gives a later sign, one directly tied to the fall of the temple, and he calls it something weighty, something unforgettable, a great tribulation. This is not a general disturbance across the Roman Empire. This is not scattered hardships in various provinces. The focus narrows. The lens tightens. The geography shrinks from empire to land to city, Israel, Jerusalem. And as the focus sharpens, something else changes too: Jesus' language. Earlier he spoke plainly, prose, straightforward description, but now his tone intensifies. The language becomes elevated, figurative, charged. The Lord is moving from the broad to the specific, and from the ordinary to the climactic. Before I walk through the details, let me make three big observations about this great tribulation. First, it continues the literary pattern I've been tracing. General signs give way to local ones. The empire fades into the background. Jerusalem takes center stage. Second, this sign forces me to shift my method slightly. Up to this point, I've been able to show the fulfillment of Jesus' signs primarily from within the New Testament itself. But the New Testament does not narrate the fall of Jerusalem as a historical event. It's striking, really. The most datable, climactic event of that generation, the destruction of the temple, is never described as past history in the New Testament. So from here forward, I must consult historical sources, not speculation, not imagination, but reliable history, especially Josephus, who gives a first-hand account of what happened. And third, Jesus now leans heavily into the Old Testament prophets: abominations, vengeance, desolation, deliverance. He is not inventing new categories. He is drawing from the law and the prophets and saying, in effect, that story, the one God has developed, it's reaching its climax. So here we are in the structure of the Olivet Discourse. Phase 1 were the preliminary signs, birth pains. Phase 2, the later sign, the period of the end. That's where we are now. And this great tribulation has three dimensions: desolation, description, and deliverance. The abomination of desolation. Jesus says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. That's not vague. That's not mystical. That's practical. Run. Daniel had spoken of temple desolations before. In fact, 3 of them. The first was Babylon, Jeremiah's 70-year desolation. That had already happened and been reversed. The second was Antiochus Epiphanes, the little horn, who desecrated the temple in 167 B.C. That too had been reversed, celebrated annually in the Feast of Dedication. So when Jesus refers to the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, the disciples would have known he meant the third one, the one still unfulfilled. Daniel had said this desolation would follow the cutting off of Messiah. Messiah would be cut off, not for himself, and then the people of a coming prince would destroy the city and the sanctuary. Notice that sequence. Messiah cut off, then desolation, then the end of the daily sacrifice. Jesus had already told his disciples he would die in Jerusalem and rise again. After that, some of them would live to see this final desolation. And here's what makes this third one different. Daniel never promised restoration afterward. The first two desolations were followed by cleansing and rebuilding. This one, final. Sacrifice would cease. Desolation would remain until the consummation. It would happen at the time of the end. This wasn't just another interruption in temple history. This was the end of temple history. Luke makes it even clearer. There, Jesus says, "When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near." That's not symbolic language about a global catastrophe. This is siege language. And Josephus tells us exactly what happened. Roman armies invaded from the north, burned towns, scorched the countryside, and eventually surrounded Jerusalem. The city was trapped. The temple was destroyed. The abomination of desolation is not future to us. It was future to them, and it happened. Description: the days of vengeance. Jesus doesn't just describe the event geographically, he interprets it theologically. These are the days of vengeance. That phrase is loaded. It comes straight from the law and the prophets. In Deuteronomy 32, the Song of Moses, God warned Israel that in her latter days she would rebel and vengeance would come. God said, "To me belongs vengeance. The day of their calamity is at hand." The apostles understood this. Paul quotes the Song of Moses in Romans 10. The book of Hebrews quotes it in chapter 10. They saw their generation as standing in Israel's latter days, the moment when covenant judgment was ripening. Jesus is placing the Great Tribulation right there in the latter days of the Mosaic age. Then there's Isaiah 61, the passage Jesus read in Nazareth. He read about preaching good news, healing the brokenhearted, proclaiming liberty. And then he stopped right before the day of vengeance. Years later, in the Olivet Discourse, he picked it back up. These are the days of vengeance, that all things written may be fulfilled. The day of vengeance and the year of redemption belong together. Judgment clears the ground. The messianic age emerges. The destruction of the temple would end the Mosaic age and formally establish the messianic one. That's why Jesus says when these things begin to happen, "Lift up your heads, your redemption draws near." Judgment for one covenant, redemption for another. Superlative tribulation, hyperbole. Then Jesus says something that troubles many readers. "This will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now. No, nor ever shall be." That's strong language, but it's prophetic language. The prophets regularly used hyperbole, intentional exaggeration to heighten impact. Joel described an invading army and said nothing like it had ever been seen or would ever be seen again. Moses said similar things about the plagues of Egypt. Scripture often speaks this way. Hyperbole does not mean exaggeration without truth. It means language stretched to communicate magnitude. If we take Jesus' words in a wooden, literalist way, we create contradictions. Would this be worse than the flood? Worse than every catastrophe in history by a measurable percentage? We don't have a suffering index. Jesus was not giving one. He was saying, this will be horrific beyond imagination. And Josephus, not a Christian, not trying to prove prophecy, uses similar language. He says no city ever suffered as Jerusalem did. Famine, cannibalism, civil war inside the walls, Roman brutality outside. Jesus spoke in prospect. Josephus wrote in retrospect. Both use superlative language to describe unspeakable horror. And once we recognize hyperbole, the timing makes perfect sense. This tribulation belongs right before the temple's fall, not at the end of world history. Deliverance for the elect's sake. Finally, deliverance. Jesus says, unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, they would be shortened. How? Josephus tells us infighting among Jewish factions destroyed food supplies. The siege ended sooner than expected because the city imploded from within, and remarkably, Christians escaped. At one point, the Roman general unexpectedly withdrew from the city. That brief window allowed believers to flee, just as Jesus had instructed. They went to the mountains, to Perea, to safety. Jesus had also warned about false Christs and false prophets. Josephus records that deceivers told people to go to the temple for miraculous deliverance. Many believed them and died there. But the elect did not. They remembered Jesus' words. They fled, and they survived. Conclusion. Everything fits. Daniel's third abomination, the Song of Moses, Isaiah's days of vengeance, Jesus' hyperbolic description, historical accounts of siege and suffering, the escape of Christians. The Great Tribulation was not an undefined global catastrophe thousands of years later. It was a first-century event. It was local, covenantal, climactic. It marked the end of the Mosaic age and the formal emergence of the messianic age. And when you see it in that light, the Olivet Discourse is not confusing. It's coherent, not speculative, historical, not disconnected from the law and the prophets, but their fulfillment. Next time we move even closer to the moment itself, to the immediate signs of the end of the temple. And the language only becomes more exalted, and we'll pick it up there next time. Until then, my friends, thank you for listening, and rejoice, for this is the day the Lord has made.
This is the day that the Lord